Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you're watching the Muddy Waters podcast. As you know, the Muddy Waters. If I can get these words out, I keep messing this up at the beginning. Anyway, the Muddy Waters podcast exists to help people of Maine better understand what's going on here in our state, because unfortunately, the mainstream media doesn't do their job. So I do that by bringing on different guests from around the state who have interesting things to share, maybe events that are coming up, and things that they're doing to help people in Maine better understand what's happening in our state, so that we can do something about it. And today we are fortunate to have with us Maddy and Jimmy. So thank you guys for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is why we exist, is to have opportunities like this to be able to share with people things that are going on. And so since you guys, this is your first time on the show, just wanted to obviously we're going to be talking about the Common Sense Fair, but just wanted to give people an opportunity to get to know who you are. And obviously this is a political, podcast. And so the idea of the Common Sense Fair, I think, came out of a political time where crazy things were happening in our world. And so, who are you, and where do you come from, and what made you decide to kind of get involved, we'll say, in politics?
Well, I'm a teacher. And even though I don't advertise, my political stuff and all that kind of stuff, education is really, really important. And, when things started going crazy with COVID, I felt the need to really stand up for the kids and education and our health. So that's really what got me involved in the Common Sense Fair and supporting Maine Stands Up.
Yeah, and it was, it smelled fishy. I'm sure it did to you too. It smelled fishy from the beginning. This whole 3-foot distancing and 6-foot distancing and masking, and the messages when you hear Anthony Fauci saying, no, we're not going to wear masks. Masks are not going to do anything. And then all of a sudden it's follow the science and we all need to wear masks, and the flip-flopping back and forth. It became real obvious that this was some sort of a staged show, that we were participating in. And yeah, it was, we decided at that point, that we needed to get together with like-minded people and have conversations and figure out what is going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that a lot of people, COVID, I think so many people that I connect with in the political realm there. I mean, you've got your old, I've always been involved in local politics people, but I'd say a significant portion of the people, especially the people with energy who are engaging in politics and, whatever form or fashion these days, a lot of us were activated, we'll say, during COVID. COVID kind of made people be like, what the heck is going on? So yeah, that doesn't surprise me, at all, obviously. But yeah, so you that started. So what are, man, my words today? Forgive me. But so that's kind of what got you going and kind of started getting connected with people. And out of that came Maine Stands Up. How did Maine Stands Up? Because I know that you guys are part of Maine Stands Up, and some people might not know what Maine Stands Up is. So if you want to kind of share what that is, its origins, and then how you guys got connected to it, that would be great.
Well, it was Dr. Christiane Northrup, one of the disinformation dozen, was she actually was one that started it in her living room. Like I said, when things were going crazy and people were trying to understand what was going on, and we were not supposed to be gathering in more than 6 people and whatnot. And about 50 people showed up at her house one night that she had invited, and they said, we need to start jumping down these rabbit holes and figuring out what is going on here. And as we started jumping down the rabbit holes, we began to follow these threads back to the United Nations and the World Economic Forum and figuring out how this was all tied together. The World Health Organization and the CDC, and it was a crazy mess. It was like untangling a plate of spaghetti, and we were all quite shocked at what we were finding at the time. Now it's commonplace, and we understand it quite well. You know how it's, well, I say we understand it to a certain level of how it's all twisted and convoluted. I'm sure there are many levels beyond what we understand.
So it started with medical freedom, really.
Really, yeah.
Yeah.
And medical
freedom.
and now it's moved on to, you know, national sovereignty and financial sovereignty and food sovereignty and medical sovereignty, personal sovereignty, educational sovereignty. You know, and that's the theme of the fair this year is sovereignty.
Oh, okay.
That we, the people, have the right. Nobody has a right over the top of us to try and force our children into a particular, you know, ideology or belief system or whatever, you know, social emotional learning. You know, if that's what we don't want our children to know, then, you know, we want to get back to the basic academics, you know, of education, then we have that right.
So we got involved with Maine Stands Up, and really were able to find some amazing people and feel comfortable about talking about how we felt about everything going on. And so that was really mentally healthy for so many people to be able to gather and talk openly about how we were feeling about masking and, you know, all this stuff. Zooming and education was getting really, really crazy. And we're seeing the results of that. You know, we're 4 years, 5 years, you know, away from that, but we've got huge deficits. Our students have huge deficits, wearing masks, communicating, facial expressions, you know, those kinds of things, speech. There's a lot of things that we're really far behind in. And you can look that Maine education, unfortunately, has fallen backwards, and we're trying really hard to get our kids back where they need to be. And it's working. We're seeing the results. A lot of schools are doing some great things. And then a lot of homeschooling came out of COVID, which is also amazing. We've got some great homeschooling things going on too.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important that you, one of the things I want to highlight here, because I think a lot of times when conservatives, you know, I'm a Republican and most of the people who listen are more conservative than a Democrat, generally speaking. Whether they're like full on conservative, we probably got some libertarians and moderate Dems, but generally speaking, most people are conservative. A lot of times, like conservatives and Republicans, when they talk about education, like they start talking about like activist teachers and whatnot. And I think one of the things that you've said here already is an important point, and it's that there are a lot of really good teachers out there. You're one of them who's really working hard to try and help their kids. And a lot of the stuff that's happening, I think you could agree, is not necessarily so much, not really coming from the teachers as much as it's coming from above.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. And I talk to teacher friends across the state of Maine, and schools are very different. I mean, I really enjoy where I am and my colleagues and what we're there for. And then I hear some horror stories from colleagues in other school districts that there's crazy stuff going on. So it's really hard. It's really hard to stay focused and what school is really for, you know, whether it's homeschooling or being in a public school or private school or whatever. You know, it's teaching our kids, you know, right from wrong, to read, write, do math, you know, feel good about themselves, be positive, be good readers, be independent, think for themselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I think the idea, the common sense fair theme this year of sovereignty, or I think another way you could put it is freedom, right? Like, but it's the idea that I am sovereign, I am in control, I am the one who decides what happens with my life, my body, my kids, my education, whatever it is. It's not determined by the government. And how in the world so many people, you know, like the Democrat Party used to be the party of like against the man, so to speak, against the grain, and now they're like, well, no, we have to agree with the establishment. It's like, and that means we have to give up all of our rights except for one, I guess, that they call a right, but that's another story. But anyway, so yeah, no, so I think that's a really a great theme, and I love that. So talk about, I love the name Common Sense Fair in general, and I think I had Mark Nyon, he's the mayor of Portland, if you don't know, on the podcast a little while back, and he's a Democrat, and he made the word, I try to make common sense, decisions. And I was like, oh, wait a second. I thought that was a right-wing word, right-wing radicals. They're the ones that talk about common sense. But it tends to be at this point that if you, like, when people are running for office, and if they're running like in a more blue or purple district, usually, like, it's one of the phrases you try to stay away from using. It's kind of campaign tactics, because you don't want to alert some of the people that might vote for you to the fact that you're a conservative, depending on, again, whether you're running for school board or whatever, and they're just going to automatically assume if you say common sense that you're a Republican. No, you're one of those. And so it's kind of a phrase that's been associated with Republicans, but it never, I mean, it shouldn't be. It's like common sense is common. It should be common to all people. But yeah, so I love the name, but what is the Common Sense Fair? How did it get started? And what kind of things happened there?
Well, we have this is our fourth year. Like I said, the first year we were just in the field by my garden, and then the next year was Brian and Lily Roy's farm over in Bowden. They offered up their farm, and Brian's a farmer. He raised pigs. We went into his backyard the night before the fair and killed a pig. Right? We dressed it up and put it in the pig roaster and created a feast for the participants. In the following year we made a bean hole pit, and we cooked like 10 gallons of beans and roasted 2 more pigs, and by the end of that year we had kind of outgrown the space. There was no place to park, and the field was kind of muddy, and we were having a problem setting up vendors, and so we decided to move up to the Litchfield Fairgrounds. And that was last year was the first year that we held it there. And I don't know if you remember back, but in the early days, like I think maybe the 3rd or 4th year of the Common Ground Fair, that's where they moved to, that the Common Ground Fair started there.
Oh, wow.
And I was, an exhibitor at the Common Ground Fair for over 20 years. It was my place to be. That was a pilgrimage every year that we went to. It was an amazing fair. But
I grew up as a kid. We every year in school, I think first grade, maybe either first grade or kindergarten, all the way, probably first grade, all the way through 8th grade. We went to the Common Ground Fair every single year, and went around and looked at all the exhibits. All that I remember is the food. Like, I was always like hoping I had money so I could buy some food. I didn't grow up rich, so we had some money, but not a lot of money. And it was like, what can I get? And that's the main thing I remember. But there's a lot of other good stuff there too.
Did you miss the rides? When you were a kid, when you went to the Common Ground Fair, did you miss the rides? Because it's not really, it's an organic fair, and that's really what we are. And we both grew up in Maine, and we would start the fairs in the spring, and actually the Topsom Fair used to be in October. That one was always the last fair, and we would be on the Ferris wheel with gloves and hats on, freezing. And now the Topsom Fair is in August. The Freiburg Fair, I think, is one that wraps up the season now in Maine. But we are an agricultural fair, just like, similar to the Common Ground Fair. So that's one thing that we want to point out, that we have guest speakers. We have great organic food. We have a farmer's market. We have people making crepes, a woman that came right from Brittany, France. That kind of stuff. But we're really about the food, the community, animals. We have guest speakers. We could have political, educational, all sorts of stuff. So the first 2 years at Brian's, we were around 100 people. And then the second year was around 200. And we thought, okay, well, we're jumping pretty much. So that's one of the reasons why we went to the Litchfield Fairgrounds last year. And this year this is the 4th annual, so here we go.
Yep. Nice. Yeah, I went for the first time because what's interesting is like I was paying attention to what was going on, and I think like I know my mom was a nurse that ended up losing her job as a result of mandates, and she so I know that she was out protesting, probably with a whole bunch of Maine Stands Up people in Portland. I think she was holding up a sign that said essentially that she was like a hero, a COVID hero, and now now they don't want. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something. I think she actually might have got it on the Portland Press Herald from that. But obviously that's a big issue that got you guys started. But I didn't even know what Maine Stands Up was until I really started to get more involved in politics. So for me, it was like end of 2021, I made the decision that I was going to look into running for political office and running for state house. And I run twice, lost twice. I'm down here in wonderful Westbrook where liberals abound. And so I have not been able to pull off a victory yet. But anyway, so I started to get involved at that point and really learn. And so it was at that point that I started hearing about this group called Maine Stands Up from a good friend of mine who had been involved with them. I think Ryan. So I started to hear about it, but I didn't know anything. I might have heard about like the Common Sense Fair maybe in 2023. Didn't make it there, but this last year I was able to make it out. And one thing I'll say is I'm a guy that I like food and I like coffee, and so I don't remember. I think I had already eaten before I went, not thinking. But I got some really, really good coffee. I think it was like there was like a latte, whatever organization it was, I can't remember, but they did
It was Vagabond Coffee.
Vagabond Coffee. That is exactly
an older vehicle, and it was amazing. Yep. Very vintage.
Yep.
He's not coming back this year, unfortunately. Okay. But people raved about that coffee. But we're doing Lucky Cat coffee this year.
Oh, nice! It was one of the things I liked about it was that it was Maine maple syrup. That was the flavor of latte, and it was like, whoa, man, was that good?
Yeah.
But lots of good food and the other things.
I think I saw your mother speak in Augusta when I went up there to one of those rallies, and this woman, there was a nurse, held up a shirt that said "Heroes" on it. And she said this was the shirt that was given to us in 2019 when this all started. And now we're being fired for doing the exact same job. And then when they marched from there down to the Blaine house, she wadded it up and threw it on the lawn, on Janet Mills' lawn. And I said, wow, yeah, you tell her.
Yeah, well, I'll find out. My mom tends to watch these or listen to them, and so she'll let me know if that was her or not. But she definitely was outspoken, and I don't know if I think I would have heard about that story if she had done that. But you never know. But she was definitely and still very passionate about that issue and about health, and I think she really was. Thinking for a long time that she might vote for Bobby Kennedy, and then obviously when he joined the Trump team, that was an easy decision for her because she's more conservative anyway. But yeah, just a huge. It surprises me that she didn't somehow get connected to Maine Stands Up, because like what you guys are interested in, like even before COVID, she was all about. If that makes sense, like she. I think would say from a local perspective was locally politically activated, but in terms of like her values and the things that she stands for, which just completely align with Maine Stands Up, she was already all about that. So maybe if she's listening, she'll listen later. She'll come on out to the Common Sense Fair. Hopefully, I plan to be there. Actually, I think I just signed up to have a booth there, so I can see if I can see how well the merchandise that we've created. Nobody's going to want this. This is more of like a work shirt, but I got some nice, things. We see if I can get some of those sold at and raise awareness about the podcast on while I'm there. But yeah, so it was I wasn't there for very long because I had other stuff going on that day, but there was a lot of things to look at. I'm one of those guys. I know that there are a ton of people in my family who like, are there animals? I can't remember if there are animals there. There are animals there.
We did have last year. We did have a Old McDonald's farm. So they were in one of the barns. And then when we were still at Brian's, we did have some baby goats that second year.
Yeah.
And we're really hoping for Old McDonald's Farm again, but we
Yep.
may be having pony rides this year.
Ooh, pony
So
ride.
that's in the works, yeah. And possibly maybe
Yep.
some goat yoga.
Goat yoga.
Yes, baby goats and yoga. It goes good together.
Okay. Okay.
We did do the sheepdog demonstration.
Yep.
Joe Grady brought up a parcel of sheep in his sheepdog Mac there, and they put on a beautiful demonstration. They used to demonstrate at the Common Ground Fair.
Yeah, and what I
Nice.
was going to say about Maine Stands Up is that people have become very active. They, we weren't just sitting around, talking about stuff. We were certainly supporting each other, but we have so many people who are now in local government and on school boards. So,
Awesome.
And again, the common sense thread and, standing up and what is really going on here. We needed to become active. So we're a very active group as well. But definitely this year, we've got some guest speakers. We have 11 guest speakers lined up already.
Wow.
We're also going to have the blacksmith shop going again this year. So we're also doing some things with the homeschoolers of Maine.
Awesome.
They're going to be coming, and we're going to have some of their students. Possibly, I'm still working on this because the teacher in me. We may be doing a sovereignty writing contest. And what is sovereignty? And possibly having students reading their essays, the winning essays, at the Common Sense Fair this year.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting if you could poll some adults and have them explain what they think sovereignty is, and then compare that to what the kids write in their essays. I think the kids are probably going to do better, but that's just a theory I have.
You want to talk about some of the guest speakers we're having this year?
Yeah. Ray Wrightsey. Have you ever met Ray?
No.
He's a registered Maine guide, but Ray is there are basically two basic ways of living your life. You can live it kind of horizontally, where you travel here and travel there and do this and live there a couple of years and there a couple of years and kind of go sample the world, or you can live vertically and you can live deeply in one place. And that's how Ray lives. He lives deeply, and he's a forager. He's guides canoe trips on the Maine rivers. He makes medicine. He's an outdoorsman. He's an avid hunter. They have an organic blueberry farm, and he's just an amazing man. And he walks the talk of this is how it is to be sovereign.
Yep.
And he's going to lead it off. Jerry Lehman, who is the director of NEFSA.
Yeah.
He was a guest speaker last year, but there are so many things, it's NEFSA's always on the ball and chasing it, and he's going to come and update us on what's been going on there. I was kind of shocked. We were invited down to Portland back in February, I think it was. The people that are doing the windmill projects, wanted to give us their big presentation. And I went down there, and it was crazy. They're trying to pass themselves off as environmentalists, and yet between 2017 and 2022, when they were putting in windmills down around New York, there were over 2,000 whales killed. Where was Greenpeace? Where was Save the Whales? There were 12,500 porpoises killed. And when this is brought up for this Maine wind project, they say, well, there's going to be those were piles driven into the ocean floor, and these ones are going to be floating, but they're going to have like a half a mile of anchor chain on each one, and they're going to be dragging it. The wind's going to be blowing them back and forth. They're going to have mud plumes. They're going to disturb the whole upwelling of the ocean. They're going to have they're going to have transfer stations, transformers to boost the electricity as it gets back to shore when they have the current drop, right? They've got to jack it back up. Well, these things are running chlorinated water through them at, I forget what the temperature is, but they're putting heated chlorinated water into the ocean. How is that environmentally sound?
There's
does that sound like common sense to you?
It definitely does not sound like common sense. But what does is when you listen to, I don't know if it's common, because Jerry Lehman, geez, does that guy know a lot of stuff that is not common, but there is a lot of sense in what I had him on the podcast, and he actually, when I had a conversation with him beforehand, he's like, I don't know if this is going to go very well because people don't tend to understand so I ended up talking with him for like 3.5 hours, not at that one session, but over time before I had him on the podcast. So I could be prepared to translate him and to ask like clarifying questions. Cause like, there's just a lot there. And yeah, like some of the stuff that they're doing with the windmills, and if you were ignoring like 80% of what's happening with windmills, you might come to the conclusion that there's something good here. But if you look at it like closely, like at all the details, like sometimes I talk about like with the electric vehicles and the electric batteries and stuff like that. If you look at the full cycle, like of how do we mine the materials, how do we produce them, how do we get them here, what do we do with the battery afterwards? When you're looking at it holistically, this is worse than just burning fossil fuels, right? At this point, maybe it will get better at some point when we find a battery that doesn't have to be like put into a landfill and you to stay away from it because of how toxic it is, things like that. Same thing with turbines. Once they're unused, once they can't be used anymore, once they're done their life cycle, now you have to go put them in a landfill and then you just can't, like, they're useless. And when you look at the full life cycle of these things, they're just not, it's not actually environmentally friendly. And anyway, that's one of my hobby horses sometimes. So you got me going, but I'll let you continue with different with whatever you got next with around different guest speakers that are going to be up. But I just wanted to comment. My mom is listening, and she commented that you are right. She did throw one of her nursing uniforms on the governor's lawn. So you begged her.
She's my hero. You tell her you're my hero.
All right. Yeah. So
that was beautiful. But before we move on to the next one, I will say that there's one feller on the MSU Council who worked for Central Maine Power and has his thumb on the pulse of what's going on with that. And one day last week, when we were meeting with all these solar arrays that you see everywhere, thousands of acres of them now, and all of the windmills in the state of Maine was producing 7% of the power that we needed for this state. How many of them are we going to have to put up to go carbon neutral? It's possible.
The biggest problem, I talked to a guy that I'm hoping will come on here. It might be the same person because he's a contact of Jerry's, and I won't use his name for now. But when he was talking about one of the big problems with these things is you have to have your base load. You have to have enough ability to produce electricity on demand, essentially. And one of the biggest problems with wind and solar is we don't have that. We also don't have the battery storage and like, not even if you ignore the cost, which because of the fact that we don't have these things, we have to basically pay higher rates to these other companies because they've got to be on standby and maybe have to produce energy at the drop of a hat, when they're not producing energy that we're buying. So that there's a lot of cost that's already there that we're just adding to by adding these things on top of the cost to produce them, the cost to, like, again, with these offshore things, all the stuff that needs to be created, you have to bring it back onto shore. Anyway, everything involved. It's insane that people who consider themselves to be intelligent and educated and look down on me because I'm ignorant and stupid, that they don't see the problem here. Like, it's like intentional blinders.
So how is it that the conservatives have become the environmental party by default, I guess?
Well, it's wild. Well, you say that because like there were a number of things where I wasn't in agreement with the Republican Party in the past, and I was like, I'm more, not to the degree, obviously, not to this like insanity but I care about the environment is the short version. Like, and I think a lot of like conservative historically have been said that they don't care about the environment, and I'm somebody who's always cared about the environment. So I'm like, and the Democrats at least had the appearance of caring more in the past, and now they claim to care, but they don't actually care. So this is one of the issues where I would have said I can agree on some issues with people on the other side. But the Democrats have gone so insane that like all those things that I used to be able to agree with them on, now they don't even believe. And they've just gone to an extreme degree. And like the only place, if you actually have common sense, is the other side. Not that it's free from faults and failures itself. The Republican Party is not perfect. It has problems. We need more people to get involved to help steer it in the right direction. But it seems to me to be the only choice at this point. Anyway.
And that's why we would like to, bring some of the moderate liberals into this. Come and listen to Jerry speak.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Open your mind and see if you can, get your head around what he's saying here. And if you do not have a good plan and a cost for dealing with these solar panels and these wind turbines once they're used up, then you don't have a sustainable plan.
Right.
You have to think this thing all the way through to its end use. I logged with draft horses for 40 years and farmed with them for 20, and when the horse is done, it goes in the ground and it goes back to nature. When we have electric school buses in this state that you can't run during the winter because they don't have enough batteries to run the vehicle and the heater to make a full cycle, we've got a problem here. Somebody didn't think that all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely one of those cart before the horse. Like, we've got a virtue signal and push beyond where, even if electric vehicles are the future, and they may be, I'm not opposed to that. If we can find a way to do it that actually is better environmentally and doesn't end up bankrupting the world, I'm okay with that, right? We do have to take those things into account, because with a lot of these policies, one of my biggest frustrations is who gets hurt the most. Like, with all of the restrictions and the requirements on building vehicles, one of the things I like to bring up is it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. You cannot buy a new vehicle in the United States, and if I'm wrong about this, feel free to correct me. But I'm pretty sure this is accurate. This is what I've heard from people who are in the industry. You can't buy a brand new vehicle in the United States that doesn't have a backup cam. Like, it's legally required. You can't. And like, look, I think a backup cam is a great idea, but somebody who's poor but maybe wants to buy a new vehicle, I think they should be able to make their own decisions about how much money they can spend while buying a new vehicle. Like, we need to make it like easier for people who are on the lower end of the income scale to still be able to have a vehicle, because instead, you make it so that, I mean, look at the prices of all new vehicles now. That's just one example, because there's tons of other things that are requirements, legal requirements now that they've made, that who's primarily hurt by that? I'm not. Like, I can afford a vehicle that has a backup cam and it's not breaking my budget, right? But there are other people that, when you look at all the different things that are included, they could get a vehicle for thousands of dollars less, which would put them in the position to actually be able to get a new vehicle rather than buying a used vehicle that may have some problems that they don't know about, right? And so anyway, it's just another one of those things where a lot of these things that we're doing and pushing are harming the poor, and the other side claims to care about the poor.
I think it was I have had a subscription to the Small Farmers Journal for 50 years now, and I think it was in there that I read there was a student from I think it was MIT or Cornell or somewhere, did his master's thesis on how many calories of energy it takes to create a tractor, from mining the ore to bringing it to the smelters, to forging, to machining, to assembly, to distribution, to to finally get it to the farm. And then how many calories of energy it takes to create a horse, it's a pretty huge difference.
Yeah.
But and the argument is, if we replaced all the tractors with horses, then there would be no land left for people to eat. It would all be fit. We're not talking about replacing all the tractors. We're talking about putting things where they belong. That there is a place for tractors, there's a place for horses, there's a place for electric cars, and there's a place for internal combustion engines. That we don't need to, as you said, virtue signal with our cars that we can't drive in the wintertime.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, those buses too. Like you hear that, like I'd like to get somebody who has a little bit more knowledge on that. But I've read a couple of the articles that, probably by the Maine Wire, talking about like how like there are these schools that have like 5 electric buses that they can't even run, and the company that they bought them from can't fix them, and maybe went out of business actually, and so they're just in like obviously these electric buses were more expensive than if they had just bought a regular bus, and so now they're just sitting there telling us not to complain about the taxes going up and the additional cost of education as they continue to mismanage funds on silly things like this. So.
Right, and tell you there's nothing to see here. Just look
right.
And a friend of mine lives down to Lyman, drove up to Portland with one of his pals last winter in a completely electric vehicle, and they were bundled up in their winter coats and hats and mittens because they couldn't run the heater or they wouldn't have enough electricity to get home again.
Yeah, but what's worse, it was a Tesla.
Well. It's
to Portland, they realized, we've got enough battery to get home so we can run the heat a little bit.
That's great. So like you mentioned Tesla, like I generally speaking, I'm there are a lot of things about Elon Musk I like, but like I never forget that I'm not like what I like about the Teslas. I do think they're really fun vehicles, but it's not the fact that they're an electric vehicle. It's like they're really nice and like they're technologically advanced. That's the piece of it that I'm most interested in. But yeah, it is, it is really interesting that Elon, I mean, a lot of the things that he's been involved in doing are not necessarily, he historically wasn't on the right. And so it has been interesting to have this, like him be part of Trump's administration while Trump is like, drill, baby, drill. Let's go with more gas powered vehicles. And then, while Elon is helping with that, knowing that he's got the company that's the biggest and most effective and best. And you talk about it being a Tesla, that's saying something. Like Tesla still is the cream of the crop when it comes to electric vehicles. And so if a Tesla is doing that bad, I wonder how these other ones are doing, which is also why like a lot of the other manufacturers who had like, again, virtue signaled to satisfy the powers that be and shifted all this money toward developing electric vehicles, and then people aren't buying them. And so now they're shifting back to, doing a lot less of that. Obviously Tesla's not, but you've seen too, their vehicle sales have gone down. Now, part of that is political, and people are angry at him because a lot of liberals like buying electric vehicles, and now they don't want to buy one from Elon. But part of it is just the economic reality of the the additional cost of these electric vehicles. And the cold. That's another element.
Have you driven one yet?
I've rode in one a couple times. I have not driven one. I kind of want to, but
yeah, I love the power.
Oh,
I'm an old automobile freak, man. Those things are powerful.
Oh,
if you floor it at 60 miles an hour, it'll bounce your head off the headrest.
Oh, wow.
They're wicked.
Yeah.
All right.
They're nice. Yeah. Back to the list.
So our list is covering, health and healing, medical, political, educational. So we're bringing it all in with the guest speakers. Nice. We're also going to have the guest speakers are probably going to only speak for maybe 30 or 40 minutes this year instead of an hour, because we're going to kind of do some breakouts too. So if people want to go into like the educational tent or political area or whatever, they can talk to people a little more in depth in small groups. So that's kind of our little shift this year. But we've got, Heidi Sampson's going to be there, and she's now the director of the Maine Education Initiative. She was a former state rep, and she was a homeschooler, and she's a farmer. So she's pretty awesome. Mark Fulford is another farmer. He has his own business, agricultural services. We also have Major Mike Gary, who's going to come. He spoke in the
Yeah.
small tent last year, and he was amazing. His what happened to him being in the military and
Yeah,
medical.
we had him on here, and I had something that I needed to get to after the podcast, and so I kind of like pushed things along. But geez, he could have talked, and like it would have been interesting. It was great. I mean, he's a very effective communicator, and he has a lot to say. So like I really
We really wanted him on the
story.
main stage this year, definitely.
Yeah. Awesome.
So we've got Meg Poor, who is also she's a massage therapist, but she also has she runs Gott's Cove Healing Center in Georgetown. So she's amazing. She's going to be doing chair massages, but she's also going to be on the main stage with some people that have gone to her center and have some personal experiences that they're going to share. Of course, we're going to have Alan Sarbinas. We have Jeff Weitzman coming from California. He's doing regenerative farming in California. So he's going to be pretty interesting. He's new this year. We're going to have Christian Northrup. So we've got quite a lineup of speakers, along with, some demos. We're still working on some demos. We're going to have music. So some of our food vendors are the Pajepskit we had last year. This year we're going to have Turcots to go, G's Hot Dogs, and Cruise and Slice, which is pizza. We're going to have Shuddy Seafood from the Bath area. And I already mentioned Lucky Cat Coffee, so we're looking for maybe an ice cream vendor or two. So if anybody else is interested, please reach out to us. But things are really shaping up.
Awesome. And all this is like, you'd mentioned before, organic. Like, is the food all going to be organic? All the vendors?
Not all the vendors will be organic, but we will have a lot of. There'll be a farmers market area, and people that are bringing anything that they have to share with people will be pretty much in that realm. Yeah.
But that's one of the things that we are working towards with this food sovereignty movement. Is we're working towards getting the food vendors there that are actually growing and processing the food that we will be serving the public. And right now do you know about the Food Sovereignty Act in Maine?
Is it the one that, like, the Citizens Initiative that was on the ballot a couple of years ago that meant the right to grow?
Yeah, well, yeah, and it was passed through the legislature and then became encoded in the Maine Constitution. And the way it was written up, every town has to have their own food ordinance, so that they didn't try and do a blanket food ordinance for the whole state. So each town can craft their own. And right now there are, it's a little bit of an old list, but there are 115 towns in the state that have food sovereignty ordinances, and that serves 294,911 Maine people. That gives us the right to grow and process and sell and trade food to one another. And every town that has a food ordinance has reciprocity with every other town that has a food sovereignty ordinance. So we can trade all up and down the coast and round, up and down the rivers and wherever, and you don't need a licensed kitchen, and I can kill chickens and sell them to my neighbor without going through a licensed slaughterhouse. There's a lot going on here that's pretty upbeat. And it was an outgrowth of sovereignty, that we have the right. Nobody had the right to take that away from us. Ever since we had this country, was before this country was started, in Europe, everybody had the right to grow food and sell it to one another. And like the water torture, one drip at a time, they took it away under, sanitation, under the guise of sanitation or whatever, and now finally it reached a point where, the Overton window was pushed wide enough so that people started backing back and saying, no, you don't have this right. We have it. We, the people, have the right to eat the food from whoever we want.
So one thing that we do have, we've talked about guest speakers and we've talked about the food trucks and stuff, but we are looking for vendors. We have some amazing vendors that we've had for 4 years, and we have new ones that are registering right now. So anyone that would like to vend, we have soap makers and people that have tinctures and jewelry and crafts and all sorts of stuff. So anybody interested in being a vendor, the registration is now open. So it's at mainstandsup.org/CSF for Common Sense Fair.
All right. Well, I'll see if I can put that in the comments so people can click on that and go to register. Actually, I think I can create a link right to the Google Doc.
Awesome. Yeah, we have about 8 people that have signed up right now, and we have about 15 indoor slots, 15 or 16 indoor slots, but outside slots with tents, unlimited.
Nice. Yeah, no, definitely we need get some more people doing the more food that's there, the better. So like, let's get some people making food.
Yeah.
Selling local crafts is great too. Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, cool. All right. So that's the list of speakers, and you kind of went through some of the speakers, but what are I can't remember if you said like what particular topics. I know with Major Michael Gary, he's going to be talking about his battle to get his because he was fired basically for not taking the vaccine, and Trump has issued a mandate that he's supposed to get his back pay and all that kind of stuff, and it still hasn't happened because they're playing games. But what are the other people going to be speaking about? And obviously Heidi and Alan are both going to be speaking education.
Yep. And we have Jake Kleisik, who's an author, who's also going to be speaking about that. And I mentioned Jeff Weitzman. He's about farming, along with Mark Fulford, who's farming. Okay. Yep. Jerry Lehman is fishing. Dr. Christiane Northrup and Meg Poore are going to really be talking about medical stuff. So we also have vendors, who kind of, have their health and healing too. So that's why when we do some breakaway things, we're going to have some of the vendors who are actually going to be sharing some of their information, whether it's behind healing or education. We've got the homeschoolers coming in, homeschoolers of Maine. So
yeah. So one of the things I got distracted when I was trying to find that form that I was thinking though is like, again, talking just about the craziness of our political landscape today, because like, again, you turn back the clock like 10 years, right? 5 years even. I feel like the people on the other side of the aisle were more focused on like organic, right? That was not real. That was more like, organic, locally sourced. And now like all of a sudden they don't seem to care about that so much. And it's kind of, it's bizarre, the world in which we live, that this is, on the right side of the aisle, which I think it is more because like partly because of the fact that what's insane about the world, right, is that because Bobby Kennedy ran for president and he like ran against initially Biden, and then he moved to the independent, and then he endorsed Trump. This has forced a lot of these people to be against what he's talking about, even if they previously would have been for it because of the TDS that exists in our world. And for those of you who don't know, you probably know anyway, but TDS is Trump derangement syndrome. It's a syndrome where people who just you can't think anything but like, I don't like that guy. And so anything associated with him, they just don't like. And it's crazy, and it affects so many people. If you meet somebody who has TDS, encourage them to seek help. I have to play around with that because I'm not saying, by the way, I don't think Trump is perfect. I sometimes annoy some of the other conservatives because of with some of my critiques, or not even critiques, but questions. And one of the things that tends to frustrate me the most is like, even asking questions can sometimes annoy the people on the right. It's like, we should just trust Trump. He's always right. And it's like, I don't think he's always right, number one. And we need to have an openness to be able to allow people to speak, even if they disagree with what's going on. And this is an area where I think sometimes both sides struggle, but I think there's more openness to that on the right than there is on the left for sure. But yeah, I'm not don't like. I say all that to say like I don't worship. I don't sit at the feet of Trump and worship him. But like the truth is, he's not nearly as bad as the left and the mainstream media would have you believe. In fact, if anything, I usually say that like Trump's biggest fault, in my opinion, is that he's a bit of a narcissist. And I also know that I'm a bit of a narcissist. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a podcast. You have to have a little bit of narcissism to be somebody who gets involved publicly in politics, and you have to think a lot of really highly of yourself and in your opinion. Otherwise, like if I didn't think I had a good opinion and it's something to share, I wouldn't be here, right? So there's a bit of that. But I think that Trump is a narcissist to a degree, or megalomaniac. But his illness is focused on this one thing. He wants to go down and be remembered as being the best president in U.S. history. That is his goal. That is his objective. And so his illness has the potential to work in our favor. That's what I would say.
And I'm gonna agree with that. And I don't know, I guess everything shoved to an extreme can become an illness, but narcissism is one of those double-edged things. And if he can pull off what he says he can, he will go down as the greatest president we've ever had.
Yeah. Well, if we're able to right this ship that seems headed for destruction, like right now, what do you call it? We'll just call it the deep state has it's headed right for an iceberg. It's the Titanic, and it's like, how can we make sure that we hit this iceberg, right? And Trump is doing a lot to try and have us not hit it. And if we miss it and save the ship, he will go down. I mean, to finish out on that metaphor, he will go down as like one of the best presidents that we've ever had. And there was if we can kind of revive this republic, then I think that's what will happen. Because this is one of the things I try to remind people of too, just because I think like sometimes people are like, we won essentially, right? Like this is what was said after the election. And when you look at it, like I don't feel like a winner, and it's not because I don't want to have hope. I do have hope, and I do believe that there is hope. But we have to take stock of the situation, which is that nearly 50% of our country voted for the worst presidential candidate in U.S. history. Like that's scary, and not just like was this person a horrifying candidate, like couldn't speak in public without sounding like an idiot. And like one of my favorite things is she was on this I think she paid money to be on somebody's show, and somebody from the audience asked a question about like what do you think about this situation, and her response is, well, I'm going to have a group of people around me who are really smart, and I'm not just going to make decisions by myself. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to make a decision and do what's right. And it's like, you're vice president right now. Like you should have had that team and talked about that, and you should be able to say something about what your plan is. Like, or this isn't like the question wasn't one of these like, oh my gosh, that's such an off the wall question. So that was the candidate that we had on the other side, and we still barely won. And again, we're seeing it now in the House and the Senate, where Trump is trying to get things passed, and they're not. He's not getting the support that he needs. I don't know that I think the big, beautiful bill is as good as Trump does. I think there are a lot of really good things in it for sure. But so I have some reservations about that bill in particular. But at the same time, like a lot of there's so many things that Trump has tried to do. They couldn't codify the Doge cuts. They couldn't, and it's because we don't. Even though we have a slim majority in the House and Senate, like people are not complying because the deep state has its tentacles in these people. And when it comes time to vote, we see how that plays out. But anyway, which is not in favor of some of the things that we think are as important in value. But anyway, how do we get into that? I just got off on a sidetrack.
But I went and listened to Dr. Douglas Frank speak last night, and he said something early on. He said Donald Trump did not win the election. Kamala Harris lost the election. That's how Kamala Harris lost the election and put Donald Trump in the White House.
I think I would agree with that in large part. The Kamala Harris, with help from the Democrat Party, with like on a lot of the major issues, like the biggest issues that I think are out there in this election cycle, the Democrats were just on the wrong side. And instead of admitting, hey, we got it wrong here, they've decided to just continue to double down. We see this here in the state of Maine with boys and girls sports and stuff like that, and they just keep doubling down. And that type of behavior is the reason that they lost. And there's an easy path to victory for them in the future if they can just say, hey, I was wrong, and stop being a shill of the globalists, and actually use some common sense. Hey, Democrats, you can use common sense. It is allowed. We actually invite you to. I think it's better to have two options rather than one option. And so I actually like a world in which the Democrat Party actually reforms and reflects the values of a lot of the people who actually vote Democrat don't realize the cancerous sore that is the head of the Democrat Party, which is really a bunch of globalists that want control. And they believe they have other fears and they have things. But like, if you actually looked at their core values, the things that they care about, a lot of them are believers in freedom and things like that, and don't side with the party. They just have bought the lie that Donald Trump is the biggest threat to democracy in the history of the world, and the Republicans are behind him, so therefore they're also bad, right? But a lot of them, if you look at their core values and their beliefs, I think a lot of them would agree with us on a lot of things. And so they would prefer, and they would even say this. I have a friend who's a Democrat, and we talk about this. And I made the comment that Kamala Harris was the worst presidential candidate in U.S. history. He didn't disagree with me. He was like, we didn't have a good option. Like people who are honest on that side know that, and they don't want that. They don't want like the extreme nature of a lot of these policies, but that somehow is what that machine is pushing out. And so we would like to see the Democratic Party reformed to the point where people actually feel like it's not so insane and there are a couple of options. But right now, it's hard to believe in anything. It's hard to imagine a case in which I'm voting for a Democrat because of where they stand on all the issues, and where they, in Augusta, you have this gang mentality where, even like it's so hard to get a Democrat to come across even on a common sense issue like boys and girls sports, for instance. We'll just throw that one out there just because that's the biggest issue that people are talking about here in Maine, because of the battle between Laurel and Fecto, and Mills and Trump. And so, yeah, it's a crazy world in which we live, but I'm glad that some people are working to bring some common sense back to Maine, through the Common Sense Fair. So I'm excited to be able to visit at some point in the near future. Well, not in the near future, in September when it happens, right? And I think we can. What's the date of that?
September 20th.
September 20th I think I pulled it up here on the vendor sign up from
10 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Yeah, at the Litchfield Fairgrounds in Litchfield, Maine. So thank you guys so much for putting that on and for coming on and talking, talking with us today, and encouraging people to live smarter, wiser, healthier, all that other kind of stuff, because those are things we need to do.
All right, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Chuck.
You're welcome. Anything else you'd like to say before we go?
Liberals are welcome. The fair.
Absolutely.
And to Maine Stands Up. I took a poll a couple of different times, and I asked people in the room, how many people in this room used to be Democrats? A full 50% put up their hand that are no longer Democrats. And I did it twice, about a year apart from each other, and it was about the same both times. They have abandoned the party, just like Tulsi Gabbard and Bobby Kennedy. And who else? Somebody just recently abandoned the Democratic Party. I just read, like, in the last couple of days.
There's a woman, actually. This isn't a national thing, but there's a woman locally here in the state of Maine, Cynthia Dill, I think is her name, from Cape Elizabeth. She's former state senator, ran, I think, for U.S. Senate at one point. I think she was going to run for. She actually did run for U.S. Senate as a Democrat when Angus King, before she knew Angus King was going to run as an independent, right? She ran and ended up losing in the general to to Angus King. But I actually saw her. I was testifying at the State House on the boys and girls sports issue, and because of that issue in particular, she had decided to leave the Democrat Party. She was telling me afterwards, because I invited her onto the podcast, and she has not yet come, but hopefully we'll make that happen in the future. But yeah, that's she's a local person who left the party over because it's so untenable to be a Democrat and use your brain these days. It's unfortunate.
All right. Awesome.
There it is. The former White House secretary just wrote a book and swapped to independent. A good friend of mine, former coworker, mentioned there. So thank you, Durand. Yeah. So, wow, that's crazy. The world is a crazy place. But anyway, thank you guys for bringing some common sense to it, and we'll see you guys in the near future. I got to get up to a meeting on a Friday at some point. I've only been to one, but I got to get back up there. So, thank you guys for everything that you are doing and have been doing, and yeah, we'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Bye, Chuck.
Thanks, everybody. See you.